Franklin Miller sat alone in his kitchen, the soft ticking of the wall clock blending with the rustle of fall leaves against the window pane. The aroma of meatloaf and mashed potatoes filled the air, a familiar comfort on a quiet Friday evening. It was Eleanor's old recipe, though no matter how carefully he followed her notes, it never tasted quite the same without her standing beside him, humming some forgotten tune while checking the oven. He had just lifted his fork when the landline rang. That phone rarely rang these days. Most folks texted or called his cell. But the old corded phone had a kind of presence in the house, a relic of steadier times. He set the fork down and reached for the receiver. "This is Franklin." "Dad, you're not going to believe this. We sold the house." The voice crackled with forced excitement. Franklin froze. "Daniel?" he asked, a slight frown knitting his brow. "Sold the house? What house?" "Our house. Me and Tiffany. 700,000. Can you believe it?" Franklin's hand tensed around the receiver. He glanced at the plate in front of him, suddenly unappetizing. "You sold your home? Daniel, when? How? Why?" "It happened real fast, Dad. Some buyers came in with cash. No inspections. It was too good to pass up. Tiffany's thrilled." Franklin pushed his chair back, standing slowly. "Where are you going to live now?" There was a pause. Franklin could hear distant traffic, a car door slamming. "We'll figure it out," Daniel replied. "We're just excited. I mean, it's a huge win. 700 grand, and we only bought the place 3 years ago." Franklin made his way into the living room, his eyes drawn automatically to the framed photo of Eleanor on the mantel. Her smile was steady, eyes full of patience. "Daniel," he said, lowering his voice, "what about the 300,000 I gave you for the down payment?" Another pause, longer this time. "Dad, come on. You gave us that money. It wasn't a loan. You said it was to help us get started." Franklin sat in his armchair, the phone cord stretched tight. "No, son. I said I was helping because it was for your family's home. But you agreed to repay it when you could. You promised me." Daniel's laugh was light, but brittle. "Dad, we're family. We don't do contracts. You never gave me anything to sign." Franklin's grip on the receiver tightened. "You're my son, Daniel. I trusted your word. Look, you've got your pension, the house, Mom's insurance. You're doing fine. We're just trying to get ahead." Franklin's jaw clenched. "By discarding promises like they meant nothing? We appreciate everything you've done, but Tiffany's already looking at new furniture, maybe even a new car. She's been wanting a Mercedes for years." Franklin closed his eyes, blocking out the words. In his mind, he saw that afternoon in the kitchen 3 years ago. Daniel fidgeting, Tiffany smiling wide, Eleanor's photograph watching from across the table. They had asked with such urgency, such hope, and he had said yes without hesitation. "Daniel," he said slowly, "this was not a gift. It was an agreement. You shook my hand and said you'd pay me back. You never said it was official, Dad. There's no paperwork, no signatures. Family helps family." "Help goes both ways," Franklin replied quietly. "You should have told me before selling the house. Don't make this into a thing, Dad. Tiffany and I made a smart financial move. You should be happy for us." The line clicked, and then all that remained was the dull buzz of the dial tone. Franklin lowered the receiver, his hand shaking. The silence in the house was suddenly louder than any noise. He looked again at Eleanor's photograph. She had always told him, being kind is good, but being blind is dangerous. He rose and walked slowly toward his study. His heart thumped, not from anger, but from the deep ache of betrayal. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one where he kept old tax records and estate documents. Behind a stack of envelopes, he found it. A manila folder, labeled neatly in his careful handwriting. Daniel House Loan, 2021. He pulled it out, hand steady now. The edge of a notary seal peeked through the top of the first page. Eleanor had asked him to get it signed, just in case. He hadn't wanted to. Daniel was his son after all. But Eleanor had insisted. "Kindness doesn't mean leaving yourself unprotected," she had said. standing in the doorway of this very room. Franklin set the folder on the desk, turned on the lamp, and opened it. The paper inside glowed under the warm light. His own signature stared back at him, and right below it, Daniel's, scribbled but legible. 3 years ago, it had been a gesture of love and trust. Tonight, it felt like a lifeline. Franklin took a deep breath. Something inside him was shifting, a quiet steel replacing soft silence. He wasn't just a father tonight, he was a man with a contract. And this time, he wasn't going to be ignored. The morning broke colder than expected, with a thin layer of frost clinging to the edges of Franklin Miller's window panes. He had just begun to stir when the sound came, a sharp, repetitive pounding on the front door. Not the gentle knock of a neighbor. This was insistent, aggressive. Franklin glanced at the bedside clock. 7:15 a.m. He pushed off the blanket and slid into his robe, feet finding his slippers in the habitual way of a man who had done the same routine for decades. The pounding came again, louder this time, echoing through the quiet house. Franklin stepped to the window and pulled back the curtain. A moving truck sat in his driveway. Right behind it, Daniel's car. Trunk popped open, suitcases lined up like soldiers. On his porch stood 2 figures. Franklin's stomach dropped. Daniel, grinning as if it were Christmas morning, and beside him, Tiffany, perfectly dressed, a designer suitcase in one hand, and an expression of casual entitlement in the other. He descended the stairs slowly, heart-thudding, then unlatched the deadbolt. As he opened the door, the cold October air rushed in. "Morning, Dad," Daniel beamed. "We're here." Franklin blinked. "Here. For what?" "Well," Daniel said, stepping aside to gesture to the truck. "Since we sold the house, we figured we'd stay here for a while, just until we find the right next place." Tiffany nodded, already scanning the interior behind Franklin. "We packed light," she said. "Most of the furniture's being delivered later." Franklin took a breath. "No." Daniel's smile wavered. "No?" "You can't stay here," Franklin said simply. "You didn't ask. You didn't plan. And this," he motioned to the truck, "is not happening." Daniel glanced at Tiffany, then stepped forward. "Dad, be reasonable. You have this whole house to yourself. It's temporary. We're family." Franklin remained in the doorway, hand resting firmly on the frame. "You made your choices, Daniel. You sold your house without telling me. You spent the money, and now you're showing up like this?" Tiffany rolled her eyes. "You act like we're asking for charity. We're not. It's a temporary family arrangement." "Temporary?" Franklin's voice was low, measured. "You just told me you bought new furniture." From across the street, Franklin noticed Walter Thompson standing on his front lawn, newspaper untouched in his hands. A few houses down, Linda Park's kitchen curtain fluttered, her eyes barely visible behind the glass. The neighborhood was waking up and watching. Daniel's tone shifted, sharpening. "That money you gave us. There's no contract, Dad. Let's not pretend like this is about legality." Tiffany stepped forward, eyes cold. "And maybe," she said, her voice rising, "you should think harder before making promises you're going to regret." Franklin stared at her, stunned. "What promises?" "That you'd be there for us," she snapped. "That you'd help. You're just sitting here in this big, empty house. Selfish." A hush fell as a few more neighbors emerged. Gary Mitchell, the Johnsons, even Tom Patterson further down the block. Dog walkers slowed. Mailboxes clinked open and closed. Franklin squared his shoulders. "You are not welcome here." "You'll regret this," Daniel said, stepping forward. And that was when it happened. Tiffany slapped him. It was fast, sharp, and loud enough to echo across the yard. Franklin staggered back a step, the sting immediate. His cheek burned, not just from the impact, but from the humiliation. Gasps rang out from across the street. Walter dropped his paper. "Hey!" he called, stepping toward the porch. Daniel grabbed Tiffany's arm. "Come on," he muttered. Tiffany wasn't done. "You're going to wish you hadn't done this. All of this. You're just a bitter old man who pushed his family away." Franklin didn't flinch this time. Get off my property." They turned, hurling their bags into the trunk. Daniel slammed it shut, hard enough to make the car rock. The moving truck driver, who had remained in the cab the entire time, started the engine. Franklin stood still, hands clenched at his sides, as their car reversed out of the driveway and peeled around the corner. The street was silent for a long beat. Then Walter stepped onto the porch, his voice calm but firm. "Franklin," he said, "you did the right thing." Franklin didn't speak. He touched his cheek, still hot, not just from Tiffany's hand but from the betrayal it symbolized. "I saw everything," Walter added. "So did Linda, the Johnsons, Gary. You have witnesses if you ever need them." Franklin nodded slowly. "Thank you." Walter studied him. "What are you going to do?" Franklin turned toward the door and exhaled. I think I need to call Robert Carter." Franklin sat in his study with the folder resting in his lap. The air was still, heavy with the echo of the morning's events. He had not touched his breakfast. The house remained quiet, so quiet that the ticking of the old mantel clock felt almost accusatory, as if reminding him of the years he had spent believing silence would keep the peace. But silence had not protected him. It had only made him an easier target. He opened the manila folder with care, like a relic pulled from memory. Inside lay the document. 4 pages, neatly typed, notarized, signed by 2 parties. At the top, in bold letters, Personal Loan Agreement, Franklin Miller and Daniel Miller, March 2021. He read through it slowly, even though he remembered every line. He had written it himself. Eleanor had stood beside him at the kitchen table that day, watching as Daniel scribbled his signature across the bottom. She had not smiled. Instead, she had said, "It's not about distrust. It's about protection." Franklin had never been more grateful for her intuition than he was now. He flipped to the final page. There it was, the seal, the notary's signature, Daniel's name, binding, legal, unmistakable. He reached for his phone and scrolled to Robert Carter in his contacts. The name had not been dialed in over a year, not since Robert had invited him to a poker night he had politely declined. Franklin hit call. It rang once, then twice. "Frank?" came the warm, familiar voice. "I was just thinking about you." "Robert," Franklin said, his voice steadier than he expected. "I need to talk to you. It's about Daniel." A pause, followed by a shift in tone. "What happened?" "He came here this morning with Tiffany. A moving truck. Said they sold the house. Didn't ask permission. Just assumed they'd move in." Robert whistled. "That sounds like Tiffany. She hit me." "What?" "In front of the neighbors. Daniel just stood there." There was silence on the line. "And the money?" Robert asked quietly. "I asked him. He said it wasn't a loan. Said I gave it to them as a gift, but—" Franklin looked down at the contract again. "I have it. Signed, notarized, dated, everything." Robert exhaled. "Tell me you kept a copy." "I have the original." "Frank, listen to me carefully," Robert said. "You are in a position of legal strength. That document is gold, especially with witnesses to the confrontation. I have those too. The neighbors saw everything, heard most of it." Robert's voice took on a firmer edge. "Then we move. We start with a demand letter. We give Daniel a deadline. And if he refuses, we go to court," Franklin finished. "Yes. We file for breach of contract and possibly for damages, both financial and emotional. Depending on what they said and did, we may even have grounds for civil assault." Franklin sat back in his chair. "I recorded the call he made yesterday. I asked him about the loan. He denied everything. I also recorded a voicemail from Tiffany. She was yelling. I told her I was recording." "That's admissible," Robert confirmed. "Illinois is a one-party consent state. As long as you were part of the conversation, those recordings hold weight." Franklin closed the folder and stood. The sunlight through the window touched the edge of Eleanor's photo on the bookshelf. Her eyes seemed to watch him, not with sadness, but pride. "I'm not trying to hurt them," Franklin said quietly, "but I won't let them walk over me." "This isn't revenge, Frank," Robert replied. "It's justice. And it's time." Franklin nodded slowly. Let's begin. For the rest of the afternoon, Franklin worked with purpose. He scanned the contract and emailed it to Robert. He compiled the audio files. He wrote a statement detailing the events of the morning while they were still fresh in his mind. Walter had already texted to say he would give a statement if needed. Linda Park and the Johnsons had offered the same. By evening, the first draft of the demand letter was in Franklin's inbox. It was firm, direct, and unmistakably clear. Repay the debt in full within 14 days or face legal action. Franklin read it twice, then hit print. The hum of the printer in the next room sounded louder than usual, more powerful. Not because of the machine, but because of what it meant. For the first time in a long while, Franklin felt like he was no longer waiting for things to happen to him. He was acting. He signed the letter and placed it in a stamped envelope. Tomorrow it would be delivered by certified mail. He poured himself a glass of water and returned to the study, holding the loan agreement up to the light. The paper glowed softly, the notary seal clear as day. He smiled, not out of satisfaction, but from quiet certainty. This, he said aloud, though no one was there to hear, is justice. Monday morning brought with it a stillness that felt almost unnatural, as if the air itself were holding its breath. The weekend had ended, but something deeper was beginning. Franklin Miller stood by his front door, watching the postal truck pull away. In his hand was the certified mail receipt. The demand letter was on its way to Daniel. He had not slept much the night before, not because of worry, but because of clarity. His decision had been made. There was no turning back. At exactly 9 o'clock, he dialed Robert Carter. It's done, Franklin said. The letter's mailed. Good, Robert replied. Now we wait. They have 14 days. But something tells me we'll hear from them sooner. He was right. By Monday afternoon, Franklin's cell phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. Franklin let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, the message came through. He played it on speaker, already recording. Dad, this is ridiculous. You're really doing this? Over money? You're going to let some old contract destroy our relationship? You're making a huge mistake. The voice cracked slightly, less confident, less in control. Franklin saved the recording and forwarded it to Robert. That evening, while Franklin was trimming his front hedges, Walter Thompson came walking across the yard with a mug in his hand. Coffee, he said simply, holding it out. Franklin accepted it. Thanks. Walter took a slow sip from his own mug. Linda says Tiffany's been calling her friends, crying about how you're suing your own son. Franklin raised an eyebrow. I haven't filed anything. Yet. Walter nodded. Well, for what it's worth, everyone on this street knows the truth. You've always been fair, Franklin. You deserve better than the way they treated you. Franklin looked out at the street. The familiar porches, the neighbors raking leaves, the smell of chimney smoke in the distance. Funny, he said. I never thought I'd need witnesses in my own front yard. You've got them, Walter said. Plenty of them. That night, Robert called again. Frank, listen to this, he said, and played a voicemail Tiffany had left on Robert's office line, not knowing it would be saved. She's aggressive, Robert said after it ended. She's emotional, careless with her words, and clearly angry. She calls you a fraud and threatens to expose you, but she never denies the loan. Franklin exhaled. So what now? Now we finalize the legal package. Demand letter is already sent. We'll begin drafting the complaint to file in small claims or civil court, depending on the strategy. Based on their response, we may also be eligible for emotional distress damages. Franklin blinked. Emotional distress? You're a senior, Franklin. You were physically assaulted, publicly humiliated. We have witnesses. It's not about revenge. It's about full accountability. Franklin sat at his desk once again, facing the stack of paperwork that had become his shield. He did not enjoy any of this, but something had shifted inside him. The man who once kept peace by being quiet had discovered a different kind of strength, quiet refusal, a kind of courage that did not raise its voice, but held its ground. Later that week, A thick envelope arrived at Franklin's door, a response from Daniel's lawyer. He opened it carefully. It was formal, defensive, and poorly constructed. The lawyer's name was unfamiliar, David Morrison, someone fresh out of law school, no doubt hired quickly and cheaply. The letter denied responsibility, claimed the money was a gift, and threatened to bring family dynamics into question. Franklin read the line 3 times. Then he chuckled, not bitterly, but with pity. He scanned the letter and sent it to Robert. Minutes later, Robert replied, "This is amateur work. They're scared, and we're going to win." Franklin poured himself a cup of tea and stepped onto his porch. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the quiet street. He thought of Eleanor, thought of how she used to sit beside him here, reading. Her words returned to him again. "Fight for your dignity, even if it hurts." He nodded to the wind, to the sky, to her memory. "All right, Ellie," he whispered. "Let's finish this." The letter came on a Thursday, delivered by courier, marked Confidential Settlement Offer. Franklin Miller received it with steady hands and set it on the table beside his untouched breakfast. He did not rush to open it. Instead, he poured himself a second cup of coffee and sat by the window, letting the soft hum of autumn fill the room. The leaves outside had deepened to burnt orange and crimson, a signal that the season was changing, for the world and for him. When he finally slit the envelope open, he found a formal letter from David Morrison, Daniel's lawyer. The offer was clear. Daniel and Tiffany would repay the $300,000 in monthly installments over 12 years. They would not admit wrongdoing, and they wanted the case dropped. No mention of the slap, no apology, just a deal. Quiet, convenient, and clean. Franklin read it once, then again, then he set it down. It was a coward's compromise. He called Robert Carter. "They're trying to stall," Robert said, after reading the document Franklin had scanned and emailed. 12 years of payments? That's not a settlement. That's avoidance. Franklin exhaled. "I thought they'd at least acknowledge what happened." "They will," Robert replied. "Just not voluntarily." The following morning, Robert filed the official civil lawsuit in county court: breach of contract, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Daniel had crossed every line. By the weekend, Tiffany was on social media trying to control the story. A long post appeared on her public profile, filled with vague references to elderly confusion, family betrayal, and financial manipulation. She never used Franklin's name, but in a town like Bloomington, she might as well have. But something happened she did not expect. The comments turned against her. Neighbors, old classmates, even church acquaintances responded, "He gave you everything, and you treated him like dirt. We were there. We saw what you did. This is not how family behaves." The thread was soon deleted, but the damage was done. By the end of the week, Daniel's voice was different. He called Franklin again, not to fight, but to beg. "Dad, please, this is tearing everything apart. Can we talk? Just the two of us?" Franklin listened silently. "I didn't think it would go this far. I messed up. Tiffany, she pushes hard, you know? I wasn't thinking straight." "You were thinking clearly enough to sell your house and spend the money," Franklin replied. There was silence. "I can't pay it all at once," Daniel said quietly. "You already did," Franklin said. Daniel hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Your house," Franklin answered. "The one you sold for $700,000? You bought it with my loan. You paid me the day escrow closed. You just didn't know it yet." Daniel's breath caught. "I'm not asking for what isn't mine," Franklin continued. "I'm taking back what was stolen." "I'll pay you back," Daniel said. "Just not with a lawsuit. Please." Franklin paused. "You'll pay back every dollar, plus damages. And Tiffany will apologize, in writing." "That's not going to happen," Daniel muttered. Then we go to court," Franklin said flatly. The line went dead. 3 days later, a letter arrived via Robert. A certified check for $422,000. Full loan repayment plus damages and legal fees. Attached. A single-page apology from Tiffany, hand-signed but cold. No warmth, no ownership. But it was something. Franklin showed it to Robert. Does this count? Robert smiled. It counts legally. Morally, you already won that part. Franklin deposited the check that afternoon. Later, as he walked through the grocery store, a young cashier recognized him. Mr. Miller, right? I just wanted to say, you did the right thing. My dad said you're the kind of man he hopes to be someday. Franklin thanked her, surprised by how deeply the words landed. That evening, as he sat on his porch with a cup of tea, Walter came by again. They paid? Walter asked. They did, Franklin said. And do you feel better? Franklin thought about it. I feel settled, he said. Walter nodded. Then maybe now you can live the rest of your life the way you were meant to. Franklin looked out over the quiet street, the same one where he'd been slapped, where he'd been humiliated, but also where he'd stood his ground. The same street where neighbors had chosen truth over gossip. Yes, he thought. Now, finally, it was his again. Sunday morning arrived like a soft exhale, quiet and golden. The sunlight poured through the lace curtains in Franklin's kitchen, warming the wood countertops and glinting off the rim of his coffee cup. The house, once heavy with silence, now felt still, but not empty. The check had cleared 2 days ago. $422,000 now sat in his account, untouched. But Franklin wasn't thinking about money. He was thinking about how it felt to wake up and not carry the weight of someone else's lies. He stood by the window with his coffee and looked out across Maple Grove. The leaves danced gently in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice, then fell silent again. He was alone. But he was not lonely. The knock on the door came mid-morning, not loud, just 3 steady taps. When he opened it, Walter Thompson stood there holding a box wrapped in butcher paper and twine. Roast beef, Walter said. Linda says you haven't been eating enough. Franklin smiled. Tell her I'll make sandwiches for the week. They sat on the porch like they had so many times before. No big speeches, just quiet company. You look lighter, Walter finally said. Franklin nodded. I feel finished. Walter leaned back in his chair. I read Tiffany's apology letter. Franklin raised an eyebrow. You read it? Gary showed me. She posted it to her page after all. Didn't name you, but anyone with sense knew what it was about. Franklin took a long sip of his coffee. She said just enough to meet the terms. Not a word more. She doesn't deserve more of your thoughts, Walter said simply. They sat in silence for a while. Then Walter cleared his throat. So what now? Franklin looked out at the yard, at the bird bath Eleanor had loved, at the rose bush she planted their first year in the house. I think I'm going to start painting again, he said. Walter blinked. You paint? Franklin smiled. Used to. Stopped when Eleanor got sick. But I found the old set in the garage last week. Brushes were a little stiff, but I can fix that. Walter grinned. Well, if you ever need a model, I've got a face made for sitting still. Franklin chuckled. I'll keep that in mind. That afternoon, he opened the windows and let the breeze in. He dusted off the easel in the garage and set it near the back window where the afternoon sun hit best. He unpacked the paints slowly, like someone greeting old friends. The phone rang just before dusk. He considered letting it go, but something nudged him forward. He answered. Hi, Dad. It's me. Daniel's voice was quiet, tired, different. Franklin didn't say anything at first. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Daniel said. Not because of the lawsuit, just because I was wrong. Franklin's eyes closed for a moment. He sat down slowly. I can't fix what I did, Daniel continued, but I want to try and be better. I mean it. Franklin's voice was steady when he replied, Then do better. Not for me. For yourself. A beat passed. I will, Daniel said. There were no promises made, no emotional swells, just quiet understanding, like the first thaw of spring after a long winter. When Franklin hung up, he didn't feel hopeful or skeptical. He just felt honest. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with his sketch pad. He drew Eleanor from memory, her smile, her hands, the way she tilted her head when she listened. The lines came slowly, but they came. As the hours passed, the house felt warm again. Before going to bed, Franklin paused by her photo on the mantel. You were right, he whispered. Kindness needs a backbone. He turned out the light, and for the first time in years, he slept deeply. No tension, no regrets. Just peace. There is something quietly powerful about watching a man reclaim his dignity, not with shouts or fury, but with a calm, deliberate sense of truth. Franklin Miller, once overlooked, once assumed to be passive, reminded us that the quietest voices often carry the heaviest truths. What began as a betrayal by blood ended not in revenge, but in restoration, of boundaries, of justice, and of peace. It was not the lawsuit or the money that made the difference in the end. It was the moment he chose not to accept being dismissed. It was when he stood still while others tried to storm in and decided he would no longer be someone people stepped over just because he did not raise his voice. In that stillness, he discovered something many of us long for, not just to be heard, but to be respected. And he earned it, not through noise, but through quiet strength. We often mistake kindness for weakness, silence for agreement, and aging for irrelevance. But Franklin's story reminds us that none of these things are true. Behind his gentle demeanor lived a mind still sharp, a heart still brave, and a spine made of something stronger than pride, principle. The core lesson is simple, yet profound. Hold on to your dignity. Stand for what is right, not with cruelty, but with clarity. Sometimes the most powerful act of love for ourselves and others is drawing a boundary and holding it, even when it hurts. Even when it's your own child on the other side of it. In life, we all reach moments where we must decide whether to stay silent or speak, whether to fold or stand tall. When that moment comes, may we all remember that quiet courage can be louder than any shout and far more lasting. Like the steady light from a porch lamp on a cold night, one honest decision can guide us and those who come after us through the fog of confusion, disappointment, and betrayal. Take a moment to reflect on where this story met you. Was it in a memory, a relationship, a quiet part of your past you thought was closed? These stories matter because they remind us that peace is not given, it is chosen, and sometimes reclaimed. If this story touched something in you, consider passing that warmth along. Someone out there may be sitting in silence, just waiting for a reason to believe in their own quiet strength again. Let this be that reason.